On December 18, 1944, SS Colonel Joachim Peiper's lead tank halted just 300 yards from 3 million gallons of American gasoline. He never knew it existed. What you think you know about this battle is wrong. The entire offensive depended on it. This truth, buried in post-war files, changes everything. Captured German generals, interrogated after the war, struggled to explain what they saw. American supply depots stretched beyond their comprehension. They were told American industrial output was propaganda. Then they were captured. They witnessed a logistical machine they simply could not match. General Hasso von Manteuffel, who commanded the 5th Panzer Army, later told British historian Basil Liddell Hart that his forces' mobility vanished under Allied air attacks. Albert Speer, Germany's armaments minister, wrote that Hitler's war machine in the West suffered an oil catastrophe. The American 8th Air Force and British Bomber Command had destroyed Germany's synthetic fuel industry. There was no real way to replace it. The deepest shock came when these senior German prisoners saw the American supply zone firsthand. They understood American production was larger, abstractly. They had not grasped the scale. They had not understood what a single American forward supply depot looked like in the flesh. The fuel dump Joachim Peiper stumbled into at Büllingen. 50,000 gallons was the smallest size the American First Army maintained. A dump like Francorchamps with 3 million gallons was considered normal. Other depots, fed by pipelines under the sea, stretched back to the English Channel. America was fighting from a continent. Germany was fighting from a continent. Germany was fighting from dwindling reserves. This gap, seen through German eyes, made their defeat undeniable. But here is what that staggering difference in scale actually meant for the average German soldier on the ground. By autumn 1944, the German war machine ran on fumes. The Allied bombing campaign against synthetic fuel production had shattered Germany's energy economy. In April 1944, German synthetic fuel plants produced 316,000 metric tons of fuel. By September, this had collapsed to 17,000 tons. That is a 95% destruction of a nation's strategic energy base in 5 months. Albert Speer warned Hitler on June 30, 1944. He wrote that the enemy had increased German aviation gasoline losses by 90% by June 22. After the Great Oil Raids of May 12, Hitler himself admitted the enemy had struck Germany's weakest point. He added that if the Americans persisted, Germany would soon have no fuel production worth mentioning. Hitler's one hope: the Allies had an Air Force General Staff as scatterbrained as his own. They did not. By December 1944, the Wehrmacht's aviation gasoline reserves were 146,000 tons. Just 12 months earlier, that figure stood at 440,000 tons. 2/3 of the Reich's air fuel reserve simply vanished. Yet, into this catastrophe, Adolf Hitler launched his largest German offensive in the West since 1940. This plan was called Wacht am Rhein, or Watch on the Rhine. Its objective was Antwerp. This great Belgian port was the lifeline through which American and British supplies flowed, strangling Germany. 3 German armies, 2 of them panzer armies, would smash through the thinly held Ardennes forest. They would cross the Meuse River. Then they would drive 125 miles northwest to seize Antwerp. The plan aimed to split the Allied armies in half. The Supreme Command promised the assault forces roughly 4 million gallons of motor fuel. This came from the Fuhr Reserve, a sacred strategic stockpile. The Chief of Operations, General Alfred Jodl, confirmed this allocation post-war. The pressure now shifts from theoretical allocation to the gritty physical reality of the front lines. The reality on the ground was different. OB West Chief Armored Officer, General H. Stump, told American interrogators in 1945 what actually happened. Stump stated the bulk of the fuel reserves were located along the Rhine River. Once it snowed, those reserves could not be brought forward. Road conditions became intolerable. Trains could not run. Allied fighter bombers ruled the daylight skies. The fuel Hitler promised sat in rail yards 200 miles east of where it was needed. On December 14, 1944, 2 days before the offensive, Joachim Peiper attended a division conference. He commanded the 1st SS Panzer Regiment. In Tondorf, Eifel Hills, he heard the regimental commander, Wilhelm Munke, Deliver critical news. Peiper recalled Monkey's words during his interrogation 8 months later. 2 trainloads of gasoline urgently needed had not arrived. Because of this, orders were issued to all units. They had to supply themselves with captured gasoline. A regimental commander of the Waffen SS was told in advance. His offensive would have to refuel from American supply depots not yet captured. The next day, December 15th, Peiper attended a corps-level conference. There, the Chief of Staff of the 1st SS Panzer Corps, a man named Lehmann, announced the expected gasoline still had not arrived. But the Führer insisted the offensive would begin on December 16th, notwithstanding. Heckler asked Peiper in that room at Freising in September 1945 what had happened to the missing gasoline. Peiper gave an answer encapsulating the German war efforts, disintegrating logic. He guessed it was delayed, rerouted. It may have arrived later in some other area, he said. They never saw it. Peiper clarified in a follow-up interrogation, document F11. At the time of the initial assault, his tanks had enough gas for approximately 50 miles of operation. He described this as half the basic load, without any reserve. The objective, the Meuse River, was more than 90 miles away at its nearest point. Antwerp was 125 miles away. A King Tiger heavy tank, a 68-ton monster, consumed roughly 2 American gallons per mile on a paved road. It consumed considerably more in the hilly, muddy Ardennes. The arithmetic was not difficult. It was impossible. This was just the first fatal flaw. There are 3 more pieces to this puzzle. The offensive began in the freezing pre-dawn dark of December 16, 1944. By nightfall, Peiper's Kampfgruppe ground westward. Despite ferocious American resistance on Elsenborn Ridge, his column pushed through the broken roads of the Eifel. He was already burning fuel faster than expected. Peiper later told Heckler that by the time he reached the town of Lochem, his column used as much gasoline in 25 kilometers as he normally expected for 50. The mountainous terrain was the cause. Around 4 a.m. on December 17, his lead elements rolled into a village called Honsfeld. The defenders were scattered American rear troops. They were half asleep, badly equipped. The town fell within minutes. Almost immediately, as American hands went up, the killing began. The historian Rick Atkinson, in The Guns at Last Light, described it. 8 American soldiers running into the street in underwear shouting "Comrade" were lined up. They were shot with a machine gun. They were the first 19 unarmed American prisoners murdered that morning. They would not be the last. By dawn, Peiper faced a decision. His assigned route ran west toward Schönberg, a poor dirt road bogged in winter mud. A better paved road led north through Büllingen. Peiper later admitted to Heckler that one thing influenced his choice. He had been told an American gasoline dump existed at Büllingen. His unit, he said, was already running low on gasoline. Peiper diverted north. Around 7 a.m., his Panthers and half-tracks rolled into Büllingen. The defenders were stunned. The town held elements of Major General Walter Lauer's 99th Infantry Division headquarters. It also held the quartermaster company of the 2nd Infantry Division. There was a scattering of artillery liaison troops. On a hastily cleared field, a dozen L-4 Cube light aircraft sat. German machine gunners walked the airstrip, strafing each plane. Then they found the fuel dump. Peiper himself stated under interrogation the exact figure captured at Büllingen, 200,000 liters. In American measure, that is approximately 50,000 gallons of gasoline. Peiper described what he did next to Heckler in 2 short sentences. He said, "Of course they found it. They captured 200,000 liters in Büllingen and used 50 American prisoners to fill all of their tanks." Peiper considered this a lucky break. Atkinson found records of that scene. Several American soldiers, hiding in a cellar, strangled their pet dog to prevent barking. 200 other men were rounded up. They were marched east to prison cages. Those GIs were forced to fuel the Panzers with 5-gallon jerrycans. This happened in the open square, the town's cattle market. For 2.5 hours from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m., Joachim Peiper watched. American boys hand-poured American fuel into the tanks. These tanks would carry him deeper into Belgium. Before leaving Büllingen, the Germans murdered 50 more unarmed American prisoners of war. The figures from the post-war Senate investigation, the official Malmedy massacre record, are exact: 19 at Honsfeld, 50 at Büllingen. The killings continued all day. If you think that was enough to explain what happened next, it was not. About 2.5 hours after leaving Büllingen, Peiper's lead column stopped. This happened at a crossroad called Ardennes, just south of Malmedy. A small American convoy from the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion had driven directly into them. The Americans were quickly disarmed and herded into a snowy field beside the road. Approximately 86 unarmed American prisoners of war were shot down where they stood. The killings at the Ardennes crossroads became known as the Malmedy massacre. It was the worst single atrocity committed against American prisoners of war in the European theater. Peiper, his tanks topped off with American gasoline, drove on. By dusk on December 17th, Peiper's lead vehicles pushed into a deep valley. This was along the Amblève River. They were tantalizingly close, by his own later admission, to the open road to the Meuse. They had moved nearly 30 miles in a single day. This was an extraordinary advance for an armored column in winter terrain. The combined American defense north of him was being shredded. Here, less than 3 miles east of Stavelot, Joachim Peiper made the decision that would doom his campaign. He stopped for the night. The hour was dusk. His tanks were tired. His men had been awake for nearly 48 hours. The lead bridge over the Amblève at Stavelot lay ahead. It was in the fading light, defended by almost nothing. Peiper would later admit, with the bitterness of hindsight, that had he pushed on, he would have crossed the bridge without serious resistance. He would have rolled straight into the heart of the American supply zone. He did not push on. He halted. This was the single greatest American break of the entire Ardennes campaign. Just 18 miles north of where Peiper stopped, in the dark forests around Francorchamps, lay between 2 and 3 million gallons of American gasoline. This was along the road south from Spa. The official army history by Hugh Cole, published in 1965, is precise. Cole wrote that the most important item in that region was the great store of gasoline, over 2 million gallons, in dumps just north of the two towns. British historian Peter Caddick Adams in Snow and Steel goes further. He describes United States Fuel Depot No. 3 on the road from Francorchamps to Stavelot. It contained up to 3 million gallons of gasoline. The fuel was not in tanks. It was stacked in 5-gallon American jerrycans, hundreds of thousands of them piled in long lines under pine trees. This stretched along a 5-mile section of forest road. Each jerrycan was guarded against weather by trees and against the enemy by a small force. This force comprised 60 men from the 5th Belgian Fusilier Battalion, attached to the 12th Army Group, plus a single platoon of the 3,814th Quartermaster Gasoline Supply Company of the 1st United States Army, 60 Belgian Fusiliers, 1 platoon of black American truck drivers and gas handlers, 3 million gallons of high-octane fuel. Less than 20 miles south, sleeping in their tanks, was the lead spearhead of the 1st SS Panzer Division. Had Peiper crossed the bridge at Stavelot on the night of the 17th, the road north was his. He could have rolled up the highway to Francorchamps before dawn. He could have driven his Tigers and Panthers between endless rows of stacked American jerrycans. He could have refueled an entire panzer corps from a single American forest. He could have driven to Antwerp. He did not know it was there. The morning of December 18, 1944, opened with one of those small, almost invisible American actions. These actions decide the fate of armies. Major Paul Solis was an officer of the 556th Armored Infantry Battalion. He had been sent south the previous night. His mission: plug whatever hole he could find. By mid-morning on the 18th, with Peiper's tanks grinding through Stavelot, Solis understood. The road north led to Depot No. 3. It held millions of gallons of American gasoline. He had perhaps an hour before German reconnaissance might come up that road. What Solis did became an iconic small unit act of the Western War. Hugh Cole, in the official army history, describes it sparingly. Solis seized some gasoline from the Francorchamps dump. He had his men pour it into a deep road cut where there was no turnout. He set it ablaze. The result, Cole writes, was a perfect anti-tank barrier. 5-gallon American jerrycans, one after another, broken open and emptied into a road defile. A flame so high, so hot, no armored vehicle on Earth could pass. Cole gives the exact amount burned, 120,000 gallons. That burn was a barrier, but here is what that number really means in the context of the entire battle. The part of the story that matters most is not just the fire, it is what happened simultaneously half a mile to the south. While Solis burned his barrier, every working truck within 30 miles raced to evacuate the rest of the depot. Private First Class Theo Lauer of the 3814th Quartermaster Gasoline Supply Company later testified. His account is preserved in the Belgian Veterans Archives. Lauer described the fuel evacuation. Trucks from almost every unit in First Army participated. Most of the fuel was safely removed. Captain Joseph Wilson of the 5th Corps Quartermaster Section commandeered every truck he could find. Under written authorization, he evacuated approximately 2 million gallons of petroleum products to a railhead further rear. Sergeant James Duncan of the 147th Signal Company, attached to the 7th Armored Division, gave a combat interview on December 31, 1944. He described Lieutenant Combines discovering an abandoned ration dump and a gas dump of about 1 million gallons. Duncan's exact words, "A colored trucking outfit with large trucks was loading and carting away the cans of gas." That colored trucking outfit was almost certainly a quartermaster truck company. They were the kind that had driven the Red Ball Express. That was the great American supply lifeline of the previous autumn. By the time the 83rd day of the Red Ball Express ended on November 16, those mostly African-American truck drivers had hauled 420 tons of supplies forward from the Normandy beaches. On December 18, they did it again, on a smaller scale. In a single afternoon with German tanks audible in the next valley, it is an unsung fact of the Ardennes campaign. The men who saved the great fuel reserve at Francorchamps on the day the Battle of the Bulge hung in the balance were largely black American truck drivers. They worked under fire in the cold of a Belgian forest. Their flag refused to acknowledge them as full citizens at home. While Solis burned his barrier and the trucks ran, the rest of December 18 decided Peiper's fate differently. Peiper, having turned west out of Stavelot rather than north up the Francorchamps road, now ran into American engineer battalions. These engineers simply would not let him cross water. At 11:45 a.m., near Trois Ponts, Captain Sam Scheiber of C Company, 51st Engineer Combat Battalion, blew the Amblève River Bridge. He blew it in the face of Peiper's lead Panther, a lone 57 mm anti-tank gun from the 526th Armored Infantry Battalion got off one shot. It hit the lead Panther. German return fire killed 4 American gunners. They had bought the engineers their minute. The bridge went down. Peiper's first westward route closed. Peiper turned north along the Amblève, then west again, looking for another crossing. Around 1 p.m., low cloud broke just long enough. A flight of American P-47 Thunderbolts and British Typhoons found his column. They were in the open, near the village of Sounier-Remouchamps. They destroyed approximately 12 vehicles, including 2 Panthers. Then, at 4:45 p.m., came the most famous engineer fight. A young first lieutenant named Alvin Edelstein of a company, 296th Engineer Combat Battalion, blew the timber trestle bridge over the Lienne River. This happened at Harbiemont, just as Peiper's lead Panthers came around the bend. According to multiple German post-war accounts, including those collected by Peter Caddick Adams, Peiper screamed 3 words. He said in German, "Die verdammten Pioniere," those damned engineers. He turned back toward the river valley. He took shelter for the night in a Belgian aristocrat's chateau, Freud Court. He began to understand that night. The road to the Meuse was closing. Just before midnight, 20 miles to the south, Captain Leland Koffler of a company, 105th Engineer Combat Battalion of the 30th Infantry Division, dropped the stone bridge over the Amblève at Stavelot. He used 20 50-pound boxes of TNT. When Associated Press reporter Hal Boyle reached him hours later, He asked if any German tank could now ford the river there. Koffler gave a sentence that ended up in newspapers nationwide. Koffler said, "No German tank can jump that." The focus now shifts from immediate combat to the cold, creeping realization of an operation's end. Peiper, on the morning of December 19, was trapped. He had a Panzer Division on the western side of blown bridges. The Americans were now in his rear. His communications were cut. His Luftwaffe air supply drops mostly landed in American hands. His fuel state was critical. He still had no idea that in the pine forests north of Stavelot, forests his lead troops never reached, millions of gallons of American gasoline were being trucked away, jerrycan by jerrycan, loaded onto Quartermaster Corps Studebakers, driven east in convoy, while a few hundred yards of high-octane flame in a deep road cut kept any opportunistic German push north on the wrong side of a wall of fire. By December 21, Joachim Peiper was no longer attacking, he was being slowly compressed. His remaining strength concentrated in 3 small Belgian villages along the Amblieve. The largest was L'Église, a hilltop hamlet of stone houses and 1 small church. American attacks from the north and west, conducted by elements of the 30th Infantry Division, the 82nd Airborne Division, and the 3rd Armored Division, were squeezing him in. The senior American prisoner in Peiper's hands at this point was Major Hal McCown. He commanded the 2nd Battalion, 119th Infantry, 30th Division. McCown was held in Peiper's command post in L'Église. He spent several days observing the SS colonel at close quarters. He survived to write a detailed after-action report. The historian Michael Reynolds later reproduced this in his biography. The Devil's Adjutant, McCown wrote that Peiper, on the night of December 21, was completely confident. He believed Germany could whip the Allies. Peiper spoke at length about Heinrich Himmler's new reserve army. He said it contained so many new divisions, armored and otherwise, that American intelligence officers would wonder where they came from. It was a fantasy. By December 21, the 6th SS Panzer Army was already breaking. It broke on the steel rim of Elsenborn Ridge. The 12th SS Panzer Division had been gutted. The dug-in defenders of the 99th Infantry Division and the artillery of the 2nd Infantry Division had seen to that. The 5th Panzer Army to the south made more ground, but it too was running out of fuel and time. Across the entire front, the great offensive bulged forward 50 miles into Allied lines, but it failed to take a single one of its operational objectives. On December 23rd, 2 things happened that ended any possibility of German victory. First, the weather cleared. The fog that had grounded Allied tactical aviation for a week burned off. By mid-morning, the sky over Belgium filled. Thousands of P-47 Thunderbolts, P-38 Lightnings, B-26 Marauders, and British Typhoons roared overhead. German columns on every road were being slaughtered from the air. The German chief armored officer, Horst Stumpf, later told his American interrogators, Allied air attacks had laid bomb carpets on the roads and railways. They throttled an already inadequate supply system. Second, at 2 p.m., the regimental commander, Wilhelm Mohnke, gave Peiper permission to break out. At 5 p.m., formal orders came from Corps. Peiper was to break out to the east with his vehicles and his men. Peiper read the order. He immediately understood, as he later told Heckler. The only chance was to break out without vehicles and without the wounded. The pressure shifts from the grand strategic to the grim individual cost of a lost battle. In the early morning hours of December 24, 1944, Christmas Eve, the soldiers of Kampfgruppe Piper placed demolition charges. They placed them on every armored vehicle they had left. At 1 a.m. they assembled in the village square at L'Église. Approximately 800 men on foot. They walked out into the woods. What they left behind in L'Église's small streets became the Western War's most photographed German equipment graveyard. The exact tally, compiled by Belgian historian Gerard Gregoire, is preserved at the Musée d'Essembray, 1944. 6 King Tigers, 68-ton heavy tanks meant to break through to the Meuse, 13 Panthers, 7 Panzer IVs, 47 half-tracks, 6 self-propelled 15-centimeter heavy infantry guns, 3 Puma armored cars, 1 Wirbelwind anti-aircraft tank, plus dozens of trucks, motorcycles, Schwimmwagons, captured American jeeps. In the surrounding villages, more Panthers, more Tigers. In total, approximately 135 armored vehicles abandoned by a single battle group. In a single 9-day operation, Major McCown was with the column when it slipped out of L'Église. He wrote that at 5 a.m. they heard the first tank blow up. Within 30 minutes, the entire area formerly occupied by Peiper's command was a sea of fiercely burning vehicles. This was the work of a small detachment Peiper left behind. They completed the destruction of all his equipment. What followed for the men who broke out was a 36-hour forced march. Through deep snow, in sub-zero temperatures, no food, no rest, no chance of resupply. Luftwaffe. Flak Sergeant Carl Loon, who survived, left an account. Loon wrote that a burning thirst from the dry cold bothered them most. Men tore ice-covered snow from trees and sucked it. Others, he wrote, threw themselves animal-like over each puddle. They drank the muck. When they took a 5-minute break, some fell asleep standing. They did not wake up when the march resumed. They were never seen again in the darkness. On the morning of December 25, Christmas Day, the survivors of Kampfgruppe Piper reached friendly lines near Warney. Historian Michael Reynolds, working from German records, gives the figure of 770 men. They crossed back over the Somme River out of an original Kampfgruppe strength close to 5,000. Peiper himself, sitting with a doctor that morning, counted only the men he had personally led into Belgium. He said they had left with 3,000 men and now had 717. Whichever figure you take, its meaning was not in dispute. A baffle group that had crossed the start line 9 days earlier as the spearhead of the 1st SS Panzer Division was now reduced to exhausted infantry, walking out of a Belgian forest, in deep snow, without a single working vehicle. 8 months after his Tigers rusted in L'Église in September 1945, Joachim Peiper sat at a wooden table. He was in a prisoner of war facility in Bavaria. He answered questions from the American historian in uniform, Major Kenneth Heckler. Heckler had been sent to collect operational accounts from senior German officers. This was part of the United States Army's Foreign Military Studies program. Peiper was a particularly important interview subject for 2 reasons. First, he had commanded the spearhead of the entire German Ardennes offensive. Second, he was simultaneously under investigation for war crimes. These were committed at Honsfeld, Büllingen, the Bauernese crossroads, and elsewhere. The Malmedy massacre trial was coming. Peiper knew it. Heckler, in his interview report's opening notes, was unsparing. He wrote that Peiper was a very arrogant, typical SS man. He was thoroughly imbued with Nazi philosophy. He wrote that Peiper was very proud of his regiment and division. He was inclined to make derogatory remarks about other units. He wrote that Peiper was possibly frightened about his future disposition. Then Heckler wrote a sentence explaining the transcript's strange quality. He wrote that as soon as it became apparent the conversation would be confined to military tactics, not war crimes, Peiper opened up. Peiper spoke good English, Heckler noted. He took particular delight in correcting the interpreter. The resulting interview, catalogued as Eth10, runs to dozens of pages of single-spaced transcript. It is now held by the National Archives in Record Group 549. It is the closest thing we have to a complete operational confession from the spearhead commander of Hitler's last offensive, taken in his own words. With the body of a Panzer Division still rusting in the snow behind him, in that document, on page after page, in calm and precise English, Joachim Peiper admits what his commanders had refused to admit. He admits the operation had been planned on the assumption of captured American fuel. He admits he had been told in advance where the American dumps were. He admits the map he carried into Belgium showed Büllingen and Stavelot. He admits it had not shown Francorchamps. He admits that when his lead Panther stopped on the night of December 18, he had no idea what was in the forest 300 yards away. This confession is just one piece. There are 3 more that seal the verdict. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey, the comprehensive post-war Allied investigation, reached a verdict. This was on the effects of the air campaign. Its summary report, dated September 30, 1945, stated it clearly. When the Germans launched their counteroffensive on December 16, their reserves of fuel were insufficient to support the operation. They counted on capturing Allied stocks. Failing in this, many panzer units were lost when they ran out of gasoline. This is why that 9-day fight in a corner of Belgium became the moment. The entire German officer corps finally understood. They had lost the war. Not at Stalingrad, not at Kursk, not on D-Day. Here in the snow, watching American boys pour American gasoline. The Americans had so much of it. They could afford to set 121,000 gallons on fire, just to make a road look bad to a German tank crew, a crew that was never going to drive up that road anyway. Broader German officer testimony confirms this. General Horst Stumpf, OB West Chief Armored Officer, told interrogators, "The bulk of the fuel reserves were along the Rhine. Once it snowed, they could not be brought forward. Intolerable road conditions made it impossible. For this reason," Stumpf said, "they could only use a small number of their available tanks. Many tanks were lost due to lack of fuel." General Hasso von Manteuffel, commander of the 5th Panzer Army, delivered the verdict starkly. Manteuffel told British historian Basil Liddell Hart, "The promised fuel never arrived. Railways could not move it forward due to Allied air attack." Manteuffel later reflected, "They were forced to blow up many tanks during the retreat in January 1945. This was mainly because they had too few recovery vehicles. This, in turn, was caused by fuel shortages." Manteuffel estimated 5 times more tanks were lost to lack of fuel than to American fire. Sepp Dietrich, commander of the 6th SS Panzer Army, Piper's own army commander, offered a plaintive post-war summary. The old First World War sergeant, whom Hitler had promoted, lamented, "All he had to do was cross the river, capture Brussels, then take Antwerp. The snow," he said, "was waist deep. There was no room to deploy 4 tanks abreast, let alone 6 armored divisions. It did not get light until 8 a.m. It was dark again at 4 p.m. His tanks," Dietrich said, "could not fight at night. All this," he added bitterly, "at Christmas time." Adolf Hitler, the man whose offensive it really was, made no post-war statement. He shot himself in a bunker in Berlin on April 30, 1945. Historian Peter Caddick-Adams, writing 70 years later, summarized the campaign in one sentence. "The German assault was doomed to failure from the start. No honest reader of the records can argue with that." Joachim Peiper served 11 years in prison for the Malmedy massacre. His sentence was commuted. He lived in France under an assumed name. He was murdered in his home in July 1976. This happened in Treves, eastern France. His death was in a fire of disputed origin. His killers were never found. Major Paul Solis, who burned the gasoline at Francorchamps, was awarded the Silver Star. He lived a long, quiet life. The Belgian fusiliers went back to their villages. The black American truck drivers of First Army went back to a country that, for another 20 years, would not seat them at the front of a public bus. Drive south from Spa towards Stavelot today, on a quiet summer afternoon. You can stop near the deep cut where Solis set his fire. The road is shaded now by tall pines. They have grown up since the war. The smell of wood smoke, if present, is from somebody's chimney. But under those trees, 8 decades ago, sat 3 million gallons of high-octane gasoline. On the road below, on the dusk of December 18, 1944, an SS colonel in a Panther tank turned away. He turned from a burning wall of flame. He looked for another way west. He never knew the difference between victory and annihilation. It was measured in the end by American jerrycans. He should have been sorry.